political tradition, you must go back to the conditions that gave birth to it. J.B. Danko fought in the courts, case by painstaking case, for producers to receive fair prices for their work. The people of his time gave him a name for this. They called him Epuafo Kania. It means the lamp of farmers. This was not the reputation of a man who had turned his back on the people. This was a man who used every tool available to him in service of the people. And go back further. The Aborigines Right Protection Society, the organization that shaped the political consciousness of the generation before Dankwa, existed for one reason. It existed to protect the land rights of ordinary Ghanaians against colonial confiscation. The fight for property ownership was never, in this tradition, a fight for the rich to accumulate more. It was a fight for ordinary people to hold on to what was already theirs. This is the foundation of what Dankwa later called the property-owning democracy. And we must clear those words carefully. Not a democracy of property owners, meaning those who already have, but a property-owning democracy, meaning a society in which every citizen has a real path to becoming an owner, a stakeholder, a builder of something of their own. Dankwa said it himself. He wrote that every citizen of the land is an audition, a royal of the land, and must therefore be equipped with the capacity to climb the ladder of prosperity and own a piece of land for themselves. That is not elitism. That is the most democratic vision imaginable. Hear him again, quote, "Our party's effort will be to liberate the energy of the people for the growth of a property-owning democracy in this land." Now let me turn to Chief Dombo, the man the elitist label cannot explain. But let me take you now to this man's life, and that destroys the elitist label completely. He was a traditional chief from Diori in the Northern Territories. He was not a product of European universities. He was not a man of inherited wealth. He was a Northern leader who understood from the deep personal experience what it meant to be left behind by a system that did not see you. Dombo founded the Northern People's Party in April 1954 because he could see that the political movement of the South, however well-intentioned, were not speaking for the North. He fought to bring the people of the Northern Territories into the national conversation. And when opposition forces came together in 1957 to form the United Party, it was a coalition that included Northern voices, Asante voices, the Muslim voices, and voices from Togoland. It was a declaration that this tradition belongs to all Ghanaians. Now consider what Dombo gave up for his convictions. He served as a leader of the opposition. He would have traded that position for comfort. He would have accepted the office that that power always makes to those willing to bend their principles. But he did not. He was jailed for his activism. He refused bribes. He rejected every invitation to cross the carpet. And I ask you plainly, does that sound like elitism? Or does it sound like the most costly or most demanding form of service to the ordinary? Now I turn to Professor Buzia, a scholar who worked for the poor. Professor Buzia, he studied at Oxford. Yes, he wrote with precision and intellectual depth, but puts aside the university and asked what education was used for. As Prime Minister, Professor Buzia made rural development a central pillar of national policy, not as a talking point, but as a practical path to spreading Ghana's wealth to the communities that had never seen it. His administration believed that development had to reach the countryside, the smallholder, the person who has never sat in the classroom. And when his health was failing, when he was far from home in Oxford, the accounts of those who knew him are consistent. He was consumed by the plight of the poor and afflicted in Ghana, not by his legacy, not by his academic reputation, by the people. Dankwa himself died not as a wealthy man. He died in detention, in prison, a prisoner of the state he had helped to build, because he refused to stop speaking the truth. These are not the lives of men who built a tradition to protect their privilege. These are the lives of men who use whatever privilege they had as a tool in the service of something larger than themselves. Now let me confront elitism boldly. People have criticized the tradition to be elitist. I would want at this point to face that charge boldly and honestly. And honesty requires me to acknowledge what is true in it. The founders of this tradition were educated men. Their language was elevated. Their networks were wide. And any political tradition that champions individual enterprise and market freedom, if it is not careful, if it does not actively address the structural barriers that prevent most people from accessing those markets, will produce results that benefit those who already have advantage. That is a real risk. It is a critique worth taking seriously. But here is where the critique goes wrong. It confuses the ideology with some of its applications. It mistakes the principles of the tradition for the imperfect word of any particular moment. And most critically, it ignores the actual evidence of what governments rooted in this tradition have done when they governed Ghana. The real goal, let's tear down the walls, not building them. The vision of the property-owning democracy was never about protecting those who already had property. It was about making property accessible to those who did not. It was about transforming Ghanaians from passive spectators in the economy into participants and owners. My own definition of capitalism is simple. It is the capacity to capitalize on economic opportunities. In a developing nation like ours, that means the state must be an enabler. It must create the conditions in which every citizen, regardless of their background, can access opportunity. The goal of this tradition, therefore, is not to protect an elite. The goal is to destroy the barriers that keep people out of one. The NPP's legacy will be found in the thousands of unknown homes, the small businesses, and the educated children whose lives were changed by the social interventions of this tradition. We are not a party for the few who have arrived. We are a movement for the many who are on their way. Let me, at this point, take you through the Kufuor administration, which built the foundation upon which the Akosua administration proceeded to transform. What did Kufuor inherit, and what did he build? When John Agyekum Kufuor took office in January 2001, he inherited a Ghana in a serious difficulty. The economy was under severe strain. Institutional decay was visible in every sector, and in the health sector system, a cruel arrangement called cash and carry meant that a sick Ghanaian who could not pay should simply stay home and die. Let alone, my dear students who are young, when the family had no money in those days, the child did not receive medical care. What did this supposedly elitist tradition do in the face of reality? I will tell you in a moment. I will not speak in generalities. I will speak in specifics. 1. The National Health Insurance Scheme. The Kufuor's administration response to this cash and carry was to introduce a National Health Insurance Scheme. The critics said it was impossible. Some on the other side of political aisle said it will not work. They even proposed a one-time premium as the alternative, which every serious analyst recognized as unworkable. Again, this government, the party accused of elitism, removed the financial barrier between a sick Ghanaian and a health care that they needed. But think of what this means in practice. A woman in a rural community does not have to watch a child suffer because she cannot afford hospital bills. A man does not have to choose between buying food and buying medicine. The NHIS was not a charity. It was an investment in the capacity of a Ghanaian people to be healthy, productive, and able to build lives for themselves. Health is not a side issue in property-owning democracy. You cannot own anything if elders has taken everything from you. You cannot build a business if preventable sickness keeps you from working. The NHIS strengthened the foundation on which individual effort will stand. The free compulsory basic education, school feeding, and the next generation. Again, John Agyekum Kufuor did something very remarkable. His intervention in the area of education were not acts of political generosity. They were acts of constitutional obedience. Article 251A of the 1992 Constitution is unambiguous. It states that basic education shall be free, compulsory, and available to all. Not available to those families who can afford it. Not available in principle while unaffordable in practice, but available to all. The Kufuor government took that constitutional mandate seriously and did the practical work of turning it into reality. The capitation grant, introduced in 2005, eliminated direct fees at the basic school level, providing funding directly to schools to cover the development levies that had previously been charged to families. The effect was immediate and measurable. School enrollment rose by 2008. The gains were most significant for girls and for children in rural communities, the very children most likely to have been turned away before. These were not abstract statistics. Each percentage point represented thousands of children who were now in a classroom instead of being left outside. But the administration understood something important. Removing fees was necessary, but it was not sufficient. A child who arrives at school hungry cannot learn. A family that needs a child to work in order to survive will eventually pull that child out of school, regardless of fees. The school feeding program, therefore, was launched in 2005 and reaching over 500,000 pupils across all 10 regions of Ghana by 2009. Tackled both those realities directly. It provided one hot nutritional meal each school day to children in public kindergarten and primary schools, particularly in low-income and rural communities. It reduced the cost burden on poor families. It gave children a reason to stay in school, and in communities where children were being kept home to help with subsistence farming or petty trading, the meal provided a genuine incentive that parents could weigh against opportunity costs of sending a child to school. Together, the capitation grant and the school feeding program gave real practical meaning to free compulsory universal basic education. They did not just remove the fees, they addressed the three most common reasons a poor child leaves school: the cost of attendance, the hunger as a barrier to learning, and the economic pull of child labor. All three barriers addressed at the same time through the same government, which is often called an elitist government. I want to say something plain to anyone who still believes this tradition does not see the poor. The Kufuor government looked at the constitution, saw what it promised, saw how far relative fell short of the promise, and chose to close the gap. That is not the action of a party that governs for the comfortable. That is constitutional equity put into practice. That is the property-owning democracy, beginning where it must always begin, with a child in a classroom, nourished and present, ready to learn. Public transport system and agriculture. The metro mass system, called Kufuor Bus, as it came to be called, may not sound dramatic, but for the trader who could not afford to get to market, for the student who no longer lost half of the day getting to school, it was a practical change in their daily life. Affordable transport lowers the cost of economic activity. It connects people to opportunity. It is exactly the kind of enabling infrastructure this tradition believes the state should provide. In agriculture, the administration undertook major reforms in the cocoa sector, providing free fertilizers and improved seedlings to farmers. This was deeply consistent with the tradition's founding philosophy. Dankwa himself has spent his legal career fighting for fair treatment of cocoa farmers against a colonial system that extracted their surplus. The Kufuor government, therefore, continued that fight in a new era, supporting farmers with input and better pricing. He didn't reduce the price per bag. The result was significant growth in cocoa production, higher income for farming families, and stronger rural economies. And when President Kufuor declared a golden age of business, he was sending a clear message: a government that is not the owner of Ghana's economy, but the citizens are. The private sector is the engine. The individual initiative is the foundation. The administration worked to create a regulatory environment in which Ghanaian entrepreneurs could build, invest, and grow. This inspired renewed confidence and attracted many Ghanaians from the diaspora to come home and invest in the country. I am a living example of that initiative. Discovery of oil, the opportunity, and the property-owning economy. No account of Kufuor's years will be complete without speaking about one of the most consequential developments in Ghana's modern economic history, the discovery of oil. And that story, properly told, is itself a demonstration of what this tradition means in practice. From 2001, the Kufuor administration set about stabilizing Ghana's economy under the IERPP framework and rebuilding investor confidence after years of macroeconomic difficulty. This was a deliberate signal to the world that Ghana was a serious, stable, and rule-governed place in which capital could be committed and contract could be trusted. That signal had consequences far beyond what any single policy announcement could achieve. One of those consequences was the reposition of Ghana National Petroleum Corporation as an active commercial partner rather than a passive regulatory body. The administration worked to create a legal and institutional environment that invited international oil companies to bring their capital, their technology, and their expertise to Ghana's offshore waters. Cosmos Energy and Tullow Oil signed key petroleum agreement with Ghana in 2004. 3 years later, in 2007, during the final year of President Kufuor's tenure, those companies discovered the Jubilee field. It was one of most significant offshore discoveries in West Africa in a generation. President Kufuor's response to the discovery was characteristically direct. He framed it not as a windfall for government, but as a transformational opportunity for the Ghanaian people. Oil, he said, was money for schools, roads, and hospitals. He spoke of Ghana becoming an Africa tiger. These were not empty phrases. They reflected an explicit developmental reading of the find that natural resources wealth, properly managed within a democratic framework and directed towards social investment, could accelerate the property-owning democracy that this tradition had always sought to build. The ideological consistency deserves emphasis. I repeat, the ideological consistency here deserves emphasis. The approach taken to oil under Kufuor was not state capture of a natural resources. It was a market-oriented strategy in which the government created the conditions, established the institutional framework, and positioned GNPC as a credible commercial partner, while private companies provided the risk capital and technical expertise. The state cleared the path. The sparse private actors drove the discovery. The anticipated wealth was then to flow through transparent and democratically governed revenue management into the social investment that would broaden opportunity for all Ghanaians. This stands in direct contrast to more resource nationalist approaches to petroleum governance, in which the state seeks to dominate production directly. The Kufuor government favored investment-friendly contracts that prioritize attracting foreign capital and technology, integrating GNPC as a commercial participant rather than asserting outright state control. Full petroleum